Your little cookout is over, pal. That pounding bass and greasy smoke are a public nuisance, and as HOA president, I'm fining you $75,000 for excessive noise, unauthorized gathering, and ethnic-style commercial equipment that violates our community standards. That's what Marcus Whitfield announced while standing in his signature pink dress shirt and black dress pants beside my neighbor David Johnson's backyard fence, clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield while pointing at David's perfectly legal outdoor grill where the sweet scent of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce filled the Saturday morning air. Marcus's voice cut through the peaceful sounds of sizzling chicken and quiet family conversation like a rusty blade. His pink dress shirt gleaming with the kind of entitlement that thinks expensive clothing grants authority over constitutional rights and cultural celebrations that predate his precious HOA by 6 decades. The morning air carried the warm aroma of mesquite wood and pepper rub, while David's family gathering filled his backyard with the gentle sounds of laughter, music turned low, and the quiet conversations of relatives celebrating his son Michael's graduation from Harvard Law School. I'm Director Robert Mitchell, Senior U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division official and former federal hate crimes enforcement specialist. And I stood there in my red and black checkered flannel shirt and black pants on my own front porch watching Marcus systematically discriminate against my black neighbor while calculating federal civil rights violations, housing discrimination charges, and the criminal penalties that would make his pink dress shirt a prison uniform within months. What Marcus didn't know, while he declared David's family barbecue excessive noise and ethnic-style commercial equipment, was that every homeowner in his development operated under Federal Fair Housing Act protections I controlled through 40 years of civil rights enforcement expertise, and his racist fine wasn't just harassment, it was systematic racial discrimination that would trigger Department of Justice investigation, FBI civil rights enforcement, and federal prosecutors who specialized in protecting America's constitutional rights from suburban terrorists in pink dress shirts. The beautiful irony was that Marcus's racial discrimination would become the catalyst for his complete annihilation when federal agents arrested him for hate crimes, while I demonstrated exactly what happens when HOA presidents forget that some celebrations are protected by federal civil rights law, not homeowner associations. In 6 weeks, his pink dress shirt would be replaced with orange prison clothing, while federal judges sentenced him to decades in prison for crimes against America's constitutional rights and the families who still honor the struggle for racial equality. What would you do if the HOA fined your black neighbor $75,000 for celebrating his son's college graduation with a family barbecue while using racially coded language about ethnic-style equipment? Where are you watching from? Drop your state below because this story will teach you exactly how Federal Fair Housing Act works, which agencies prosecute hate crimes, and the specific legal strategies that turn clipboard authority into federal terrorism charges when pink dress shirt tyrants forget that racial discrimination is a federal crime carrying decades in prison. What would you do if the HOA fined your black neighbor $75,000 for celebrating his son's college graduation with a family barbecue while using racially coded language about ethnic-style equipment? Where are you watching from? Drop your state below because this story will teach you exactly how Federal Fair Housing Act works, which agencies prosecute hate crimes, and the specific legal strategies that turn clipboard authority into federal terrorism charges when pink dress shirt tyrants forget that racial discrimination is a federal crime carrying decades in prison. What would you do if the HOA fined your black neighbor $75,000 for celebrating his son's college graduation with a family barbecue while using racially coded language about ethnic-style equipment? Where are you watching from? Drop your state below because this story will teach you exactly how Federal Fair Housing Act works, which agencies prosecute hate crimes, and the specific legal strategies that turn clipboard authority into federal terrorism charges when pink dress shirt tyrants forget that racial discrimination is a federal crime carrying decades in prison. David Johnson was everything Marcus despised, wrapped in success that couldn't be ignored or diminished through HOA harassment. A respected professor of African American Studies at the University of Virginia, David had lived in Meadowview Estates for 12 years, raising his family in a beautiful colonial home that he maintained impeccably while serving on the school board and volunteering with youth mentorship programs. His son Michael had just graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, following his father's example of excellence through education and community service. The celebration was a testament to generational achievement, family values, and the American dream realized through hard work and determination. The barbecue itself was a masterpiece of outdoor cooking, featuring David's custom-built smoker that he'd welded himself using skills learned during his military service before college. The equipment was spotless, professional grade, and operated at noise levels comparable to any outdoor cooking system in the neighborhood. David's music was jazz classics, played at conversational volume. His guests were family members and longtime friends. And the gathering was exactly the kind of wholesome community activity that should make any neighborhood proud to claim such residents. Marcus's targeting of David began the moment he became HOA president, focusing on a successful black family whose very presence seemed to offend his vision of suburban homogeneity. The first complaints were subtle: parking violations for guests attending David's son's high school graduation party, noise complaints for birthday celebrations that were quieter than the weekly poker games at Marcus's own house, and aesthetic violations for outdoor decorations during Juneteenth that were smaller and more tasteful than Christmas displays throughout the neighborhood. But Marcus's racism became undeniable when he implemented what he called cultural activity monitoring, systematic surveillance of David's family gatherings with particular attention to music, food preparation, and guest demographics. His pink dress shirt became a familiar sight during David's celebrations, lurking at property lines with cameras and sound meters documenting violations that existed only in his discriminatory imagination. The $75,000 fine represented Marcus's nuclear option, a financial weapon designed to force David from the neighborhood through economic terrorism disguised as noise enforcement. The amount was calculated to exceed David's liquid assets, forcing either immediate payment that would bankrupt the family or foreclosure proceedings that would accomplish Marcus's goal of racial elimination through legal harassment. Standing on my porch in my red and black checkered shirt, watching Marcus deliver his racist ultimatum while David's family tried to enjoy their celebration, I felt the cold anger that had driven my 40-year career prosecuting exactly this kind of constitutional violation. Marcus had just committed multiple federal crimes in broad daylight, and he was too blinded by racist arrogance to realize he'd targeted someone whose neighbor happened to be the federal official who would destroy him completely. Marcus's escalation peaked when he hired noise compliance specialists to document David's family gathering. 3 unlicensed contractors whose expertise consisted of taking photographs and sound readings they couldn't interpret while Marcus supervised from his air-conditioned BMW, his pink dress shirt pressed crisp as his racist arrogance. Their assessment recommended immediate cultural activity cessation, noise source elimination, and aesthetic compliance modification that would end David's family celebrations while violating every federal civil rights protection established since 1968. The morning sun caught the fabric of his pink dress shirt as he gestured dismissively at David's backyard, where 3 generations of the Johnson family were celebrating Michael's law school graduation, treating cultural heritage and family achievement like aesthetic pollution that needed elimination for suburban racial purity. I watched from my kitchen window in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, documenting every violation while preparing the federal case that would destroy Marcus completely. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a federal civil rights attorney I'd worked with during my Department of Justice career, reviewed Marcus's harassment campaign with professional horror that bordered on constitutional outrage. Robert, these actions constitute systematic racial discrimination while violating federal Fair Housing Act protections that have been established law for over 50 years, she reported, while examining Marcus's documentation that showed his complete ignorance of federal civil rights law. He's systematically targeting a black family's cultural celebrations using racially coded language that creates clear evidence of discriminatory intent, federal violations that carry substantial criminal penalties under hate crime statutes. But Marcus's biggest mistake was underestimating who was watching his racist harassment campaign unfold. A simple internet search would have revealed my 40-year career enforcing federal civil rights laws, my current position as U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Director with exclusive authority over hate crimes prosecution, and my direct control over the federal enforcement actions that could make his development disappear from federal housing protection maps with one phone call to Washington. My professional response was methodical and devastating, beginning with comprehensive documentation of every discriminatory act while Marcus continued his harassment, completely unaware that a federal civil rights director was building an airtight case against him. I contacted U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Chief Rebecca Torres, a no-nonsense prosecutor who'd spent 20 years sending racist officials to federal prison. Director Mitchell, this represents textbook racial discrimination and systematic targeting of protected cultural celebrations, she confirmed after reviewing my evidence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd prosecuted hate crimes across multiple states. Special Agent David Rodriguez from the FBI's Civil Rights Enforcement Unit coordinated federal response with surgical precision. Director Mitchell, the Johnson family is protected under federal Fair Housing Act provisions, and Marcus's systematic targeting constitutes hate crimes under federal civil rights statutes, he explained during our secure briefing. This isn't just harassment. This is organized racial discrimination that federal prosecutors treat as domestic terrorism against constitutional protections. The FBI's involvement transformed Marcus's barbecue fine into a federal hate crimes investigation targeting systematic racial discrimination disguised as HOA enforcement. My Department of Justice contacts prepared federal civil rights prosecutions that would demonstrate exactly what happens when HOA presidents attack the constitutional protections that federal law enforces with maximum criminal penalties. Dr. Evan Reed's forensic analysis of Marcus's HOA finances revealed the funding source for his discrimination campaign: systematic embezzlement through shell companies and kickback schemes involving his brother's property management business. $1.2 million stolen through fraudulent invoices and fake compliance assessments, Reed reported, while spreading evidence across my kitchen table where I sat in my red and black checkered shirt, morning light illuminating both financial crimes and civil rights violations that would make federal judges reach for maximum sentences. The first major escalation came when Marcus organized what he called an emergency community safety meeting specifically to address David's ongoing violations and cultural disruptions that allegedly threatened property values and community harmony. The meeting, held without proper notice to exclude David from defending himself, was recorded by concerned neighbors who recognized the discriminatory targeting. Marcus stood in his pink dress shirt delivering a presentation about maintaining community standards that was filled with racially coded language about certain types of gatherings and inappropriate cultural activities that needed HOA regulation. The audio recordings of Marcus's presentation became federal evidence of systematic racial discrimination, with his own words providing clear proof of discriminatory intent that federal prosecutors would use to destroy him in court. His references to ethnic cooking methods, cultural music preferences, and demographic compatibility were textbook examples of housing discrimination that violated every principle of Federal Fair Housing Act protections. Meanwhile, Marcus's harassment of David intensified, with daily compliance inspections where he would patrol the property line in his golf cart, photographing David's family activities, measuring noise levels during quiet conversations, and documenting violations that existed only in his racist imagination. Each inspection was recorded by my security cameras, creating comprehensive evidence of systematic stalking and harassment that federal civil rights prosecutors would present as proof of organized hate crimes. The federal investigation accelerated when Department of Justice civil rights specialists discovered Marcus had been systematically researching other minority families throughout Virginia. His computer files containing compliance assessments and cultural modification proposals targeting 27 additional Black, Latino, and Asian families across 6 developments. His pink dress shirt had become a familiar sight at minority family celebrations, where he'd conducted surveillance while calculating elimination strategies for cultural activities that federal law protected from racial discrimination. I coordinated the expanding federal response from my home office, sitting in my red and black checkered shirt with civil rights case files spread across my desk, marking every family Marcus had targeted and building a comprehensive federal prosecution that would demonstrate his systematic pattern of racial terrorism. Dr. James Wilson, a federal hate crime specialist who'd prosecuted civil rights violations across the Southeast, analyzed Marcus's discrimination campaign with professional determination. This represents coordinated attack on federally protected minority families disguised as HOA enforcement, he testified during preliminary hearings. Mr. Whitfield has systematically targeted constitutionally protected cultural celebrations while using fraudulent noise assessments to legitimize racial discrimination for suburban demographic control. The civil lawsuits began immediately after Marcus's federal arrest, with NAACP, Southern Poverty Law Center, and other civil rights organizations filing comprehensive damages claims against Marcus, his entire HOA board, and every contractor involved in his racial discrimination conspiracy. Attorney Sarah Chen argued that Marcus's deliberate targeting of Black families constituted federal hate crimes warranting punitive damages that would bankrupt his personal assets and HOA treasury while establishing legal precedents protecting minority families from HOA racial discrimination. Marcus's desperate final attempt to legitimize his racism came through filing emergency motions claiming his discrimination was actually property value protection and community harmony enhancement that superseded federal civil rights protections. The legal arguments were so constitutionally absurd they violated basic principles of racial equality. But Marcus pressed forward with motions that became additional evidence of his systematic criminal intent to eliminate minority families through economic terrorism. The FBI's expanded financial investigation revealed Marcus's racial discrimination campaign had been funded through massive embezzlement from HOA reserves, with stolen funds financing surveillance equipment, fraudulent assessments, and kickback schemes involving his brother's compliance consulting business. Special Agent Rodriguez discovered Marcus had stolen $2.8 million from community funds while creating systematic federal liability for every resident who'd supported his racial discrimination through HOA assessments and discriminatory voting. The catastrophic test came when Marcus escalated to physical harassment, organizing what he called community safety patrols that involved following David Johnson's family members, photographing their activities, and creating detailed surveillance files on their daily routines. The harassment expanded to include David's workplace, with Marcus filing false complaints with the university about David's radical activism and attempting to damage his professional reputation through systematic character assassination. Federal civil rights agents responded immediately when David reported the stalking and harassment, arriving to find Marcus coordinating surveillance operations from his BMW while wearing his pink dress shirt like a uniform of racial persecution. The FBI documented every aspect of Marcus's organized harassment campaign, from the surveillance equipment to the detailed files he'd compiled on David's family, creating overwhelming evidence of systematic hate crimes that would make federal prosecutors eager to seek maximum sentences. The federal trial began with media coverage that transformed Marcus's pink dress shirt into a national symbol of suburban racism and systematic hate crimes targeting successful minority families. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of racial discrimination, Federal Fair Housing Act violations, and organized harassment that had endangered constitutional protections for aesthetic preferences and community demographic control while enriching Marcus's family through embezzled funds and fraudulent compliance contracts. I attended every day of the trial in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, sitting in the front row where Marcus could see exactly who had built the federal case that would send him to prison for decades. Marcus's defense crumbled under cross-examination, revealing his complete ignorance of federal civil rights law and constitutional protections that guarantee racial equality regardless of HOA aesthetic preferences. Wearing standard business clothing instead of his signature pink dress shirt, Marcus appeared pathetic while prosecutors played recordings of him defending his racial discrimination during active federal investigation, his voice carrying obvious racist intent that made jurors visibly angry. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Chief Rebecca Torres delivered testimony that ended Marcus's defense permanently. Mr. Whitfield's actions represent the most systematic racial discrimination I've encountered in 20 years of federal civil rights enforcement, she stated, while prosecutors displayed photographs of David Johnson's harassment and Marcus's surveillance files. His campaign was specifically designed to eliminate a successful black family through economic terrorism and systematic stalking that violated every principle of Federal Fair Housing Act protections. Dr. Sarah Martinez's constitutional law analysis demonstrated how Marcus's discrimination violated every principle of racial equality established by the Civil Rights Act and federal fair housing protections. This represents systematic hate crimes disguised as HOA enforcement, she testified. Marcus engineered racial elimination through economic harassment that prioritized suburban demographic control over constitutional guarantees of racial equality. The financial evidence revealed Marcus had systematically embezzled HOA funds while enriching family members through inflated contractor invoices and surveillance equipment purchases. Special Agent Rodriguez testified about discovering $2.8 million in stolen community funds, fake compliance assessments used to justify racial targeting, and shell companies designed to launder money through Marcus's discrimination enterprise. David Johnson delivered powerful victim impact testimony describing the emotional trauma of systematic racial harassment that had targeted his family's achievements and cultural celebrations. Marcus Whitfield turned our neighborhood into a surveillance state where my family lived in constant fear of racist harassment disguised as HOA enforcement, David testified. He tried to eliminate our cultural celebrations, our family achievements, and our constitutional right to live peacefully in our own home. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison delivered Marcus's fate with gravity reserved for hate crimes that attack America's constitutional foundations. Mr. Whitfield, you systematically discriminated against a black family while embezzling community funds to finance racial harassment that violated Federal Fair Housing Act protections and constitutional guarantees of racial equality, she stated while Marcus stood in shackles. Your conduct represents fundamental racism that demands maximum federal consequences. The sentence was devastating: 29 years in federal prison, complete asset forfeiture totaling $8.2 million, and restitution exceeding $45 million to civil rights organizations and the Johnson family. Marcus's discrimination infrastructure was permanently dismantled by federal marshals who seized his surveillance equipment and destroyed his harassment tools while restoring David Johnson's constitutional right to peaceful enjoyment of his property. The case became a national model for civil rights protection that attracted support from NAACP, ACLU, and federal agencies committed to protecting minority families from HOA racial discrimination. Marcus Whitfield remains incarcerated in high-security federal prison, his appeals exhausted, early release requests consistently denied. Prison officials report he remains unrepentant, showing no understanding that his racial discrimination violated constitutional protections. This attitude ensures he'll serve his full 29-year sentence while America's racial equality remains protected by federal law. The broader impact extended nationwide as the federal prosecution became a landmark case, setting legal precedents for prosecuting HOA officials who systematically discriminate against minority families. The Johnson Fair Housing Protection Act, new federal legislation inspired by this case, now mandates enhanced penalties for housing discrimination and strengthens Department of Justice enforcement authority. David Johnson's family continues to thrive in their home, hosting celebrations that now draw support from neighbors who understand the importance of racial equality and constitutional protections. Michael Johnson, whose graduation celebration sparked Marcus's racist harassment, now works as a civil rights attorney, using his Harvard law education to fight housing discrimination nationwide. For anyone witnessing similar racial discrimination, the lessons are clear. Document everything meticulously. Know your rights under Federal Fair Housing Act protections. Contact Department of Justice Civil Rights Division immediately when HOAs engage in racial discrimination. And build coalitions with civil rights organizations who have resources to fight hate crimes through federal courts. Finally, never let fear prevent you from defending constitutional rights against racist harassment by pink dress shirt tyrants who think HOA authority supersedes federal civil rights law. Marcus thought he could eliminate a successful black family through economic terrorism and systematic harassment. His 29-year federal prison sentence proves that racial discrimination carries severe consequences when federal civil rights directors witness hate crimes and respond with the full power of constitutional law enforcement. 2 years later, I stood on my porch in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, breathing air that smelled like David's weekend barbecue and constitutional justice, while listening to the sounds of his family's laughter that Marcus had tried to silence through racial harassment. His hate crimes had been the catalyst for his complete destruction, proving that America's racial equality has federal defenders who will protect constitutional rights from suburban racism. What would you do if you witnessed systematic racial discrimination against your neighbors? Share your civil rights protection story below and subscribe for more justice stories where pink dress shirt racists learn that hate crimes carry federal prison sentences measured in decades.